In the winter of 1858, in a crowded tenement on the Lower East Side of New York, a mother did the most ordinary thing a mother can do. She fed her baby. The milk came in a can stamped with a picture of green rolling pastures and the words "Pure Country Milk." She had paid a few cents for it because it was the cheapest milk in the city, and a few cents was what she had. Within a week, the baby was dead. Not from a plague, not from cold, from the milk. That year, a contemporary estimate reported by the New York Times put the toll near 8,000 infants in that single city, wasting away from uncontrollable illness, their small bodies giving out one after another. 8,000 in 1 year, in one city. That is more than 20 babies dying every single day, in the same streets, from the same cause, and almost none of their parents ever knew why. This was one of the deadliest consumer scandals in all of American history, and at the center of it was not a poison in the usual sense, not a weapon, not a disease anyone had a name for yet. It was something far more ordinary than any of those. It was a glass of milk. Because milk was never just a drink. It never was. The drink we hand to children because it is supposed to be the purest, safest, most wholesome thing on the table. Sold, that year, specifically as the pure and natural choice. What that mother could not know was that her can of country milk had never been near the country. It came from a cow chained in a shed beside a whiskey distillery, and the white it was whitened with was plaster of Paris. But the poisoning of milk does not start in a New York tenement. It starts long before the first city was ever built, with a truth most people never learn. For almost all of human history, milk was not a gift. It was something our bodies were built to reject. Here's the strange fact underneath everything. For most of human history, an adult who drank a large glass of fresh milk would get sick, cramps, nausea, the works. Milk is loaded with lactose, a sugar the human body stops digesting after infancy because in nature, no mammal drinks milk after it is weaned. We were designed to leave milk behind in childhood, the way every other animal on Earth does. Then, something rewired us. When humans domesticated sheep, goats, and cattle in the Near East roughly 10,000 years ago, a handful of people carried a genetic mutation that let them keep digesting lactose into adulthood. Scientists call it lactase persistence, and they have traced it to a single change in our DNA, a switch sitting just upstream of the gene that makes the enzyme. That switch first spread among dairying farmers somewhere between the Central Balkans and Central Europe about 7,500 years ago, in the first wave of farmers pushing across the continent. Think about what that means. Milk did not adapt to fit humans. Humans mutated to fit milk. The people who could stomach it survived a little better, fed their children a little better through famines and hard winters, and passed the gene on until an entire branch of humanity had rebuilt its own biology around a liquid meant for baby cows. Today, most people of Northern European descent carry that switch, while across much of Asia and Africa, the majority of adults still cannot fully digest fresh milk at all. We are, quite literally, the mutants who drink milk. And that split, who can drink it and who cannot, still runs right through the human species. And even for those mutants, fresh liquid milk was not the prize, because there was a much bigger problem waiting, and it had nothing to do with genetics. Milk spoils. In a world with no refrigeration, a pail of fresh milk turns sour within hours in the summer heat. So for thousands of years, almost nobody actually drank fresh milk as a beverage. They could not. By the time it traveled any distance, it was rotten. Instead, our ancestors did something clever. They turned milk into things that would survive. Cheese, butter, yogurt, each of these was a piece of ancient technology, a way to trap the nourishment of milk in a form that would not kill you a day later and would even lower the lactose that made people sick. For most of history, milk on a table meant a wheel of cheese or a crock of butter, not a cold white glass. Fresh liquid milk, poured and drunk on its own, was a luxury of people who lived close to a healthy cow. A farm child might have it. A city dweller, Almost never. For thousands of years, this kept milk relatively safe by accident, because the dangerous version, warm fresh milk sitting in the open, simply could not travel far enough to reach many people before it turned. Then, two things changed at once, and both of them broke that accidental safety. Refrigeration did not exist yet, but the demand did, exploding in the growing cities. And a new belief was taking hold that fresh cow's milk was the ideal food for babies, the closest thing to a mother's own. So the market wanted rivers of fresh liquid milk. In exactly the places where fresh milk was most likely to spoil or be faked, and it wanted it most of all for the people least able to tell the difference, infants. The idea that milk is a daily drink you buy fresh by the glass is not ancient at all. It is barely 2 centuries old. And it was born out of a collision that no one planned. The city arrived. In the early 1800s, American cities exploded. New York swelled with wave after wave of immigrants, families packed into tenements, all of them needing to eat, all of them wanting milk for their children. But the healthy dairy farms were far out in the countryside, and fresh milk could not survive the journey into the city without spoiling. So the milk had to be produced inside the city itself. And that is where two industries found each other. Right beside the tenements sat the whiskey distilleries, and distilleries had a problem of their own. Making alcohol left behind enormous quantities of hot, fermented grain waste, a steaming mush called swill. It was garbage, and getting rid of it cost money. Then, someone did the math. Keep cows in sheds attached to the distillery. Pipe the hot swill straight from the still into their feeding troughs. The distillery gets rid of its waste for free. The cows produce milk right there in the heart of the city, fresh enough to sell before it spoils. Cheap milk, no waste, no shipping. On paper, it was brilliant. That choice looked harmless on the ledger. It was not. Here is the number that should stop you. By the late 1830s, this distillery milk, this so-called swill milk, made up somewhere between 50 and 80% of all the milk consumed in America's large northeastern cities. Not a fringe product, not the cheap corner of the market. The majority of the milk in the biggest cities in the country came out of these sheds, and the sheds were a nightmare. The cows were fed almost nothing but hot alcohol waste, a diet that would ruin any animal. They stood in their own filth in cramped wooden stalls, often never seeing daylight, packed shoulder to shoulder by the hundreds. They got sick. Their teeth rotted and fell out. Ulcers opened on their bodies. Some grew so weak and diseased that they could no longer stand on their own, and rather than let a paying animal go to waste, the dairymen rigged canvas slings from the rafters to hoist the dying cows upright so they could keep being milked until the very end. There was even a phrase for it, drawn from the newspapers of the day. They called it milking the dry cow. Understand what that meant for the city around them. A New York that was doubling in size every few decades. Hundreds of thousands of new arrivals crammed into neighborhoods with no clean water and no idea where their food came from, was drinking milk squeezed from animals that were quietly dying in the dark. And nobody in charge was counting the cost. Because there was no one in charge at all. The milk that came out was exactly what you would expect from a starving, sick animal. Thin, watery, faintly blue. It looked nothing like real milk, which meant that before anyone could sell it, it had to be disguised. And the way they disguised it is the part of this story that most people never learn. To turn the thin, bluish liquid from a dying cow into something that looked like rich, healthy milk, the dealers reached for the chemistry set. They whitened it with plaster of Paris, the same powder used to patch walls. They thickened it with starch and eggs to give it body. They tinted it with molasses and burnt sugar to fake the warm cream color of real milk. And they stretched every gallon further by cutting it with dirty water. Plaster, starch, eggs, molasses, water, that was the recipe, and it was poured into cans and bottles and carried through the streets to the doors of the poorest families in the city. Then came the final touch, the part that turns this from negligence into something colder. They branded it. The cans were labeled Pure Country Milk. Some carried pictures of green pastures and grazing cows in the open air. The dirtiest, most dangerous milk in the city was dressed up and sold as the wholesome milk of the countryside, and it was aimed straight at mothers who wanted the best they could afford for their babies. The families who bought it were mostly immigrants, mostly poor, and they were told, in ink, that they were making the safe choice. The clock was already ticking on 8,000 small lives a year. The city just could not hear it yet. This is the part of milk's history that most people never learn about, because this is where the ledger comes due. For the poorest families, this cheapest milk was not a treat. It was survival. A mother who could not breastfeed, who worked long hours in a factory or a laundry, had one affordable way to feed her infant, and it was the can with the green pastures on the label. The product marketed most aggressively for babies was the product killing them. The illness moved the same way every time. A baby fed on swill milk would weaken, then waste, then die of relentless diarrhea, the small body simply unable to hold on. Multiply that by the poorest districts of a booming city, and you reach the figure the newspapers of the era reported, that contemporary estimate near 8,000 infants a year in New York alone. Historians today treat that number carefully as an era's own reckoning rather than an audited count, but even the cautious reading describes a catastrophe hiding in plain sight, in the most ordinary object in the home. And here is the coldest part. It was all legal. There was no law being broken, because there was almost no law at all. No agency inspected the sheds. No rule said milk had to come from a healthy animal. No one checked whether pure country milk had ever been near the country. The men who ran the swill dairies were not outlaws. They were businessmen, some of them wealthy and well-connected, operating in a market with no rules, and the money was very good. The people who profited built comfortable lives. The people who paid were buried, many of them, without ever being counted. If this is the kind of history you want more of, the buried economics behind the things we eat and drink every day, this is exactly what this channel does every week, and the next part of the milk story is where it finally turns. Because someone was about to walk into those sheds with an artist and a notebook. Picture it. May of 1858. A team of reporters and a sketch artist push open the door of a Brooklyn distillery shed, and the smell hits them first, hot and sour and thick. Inside, in the half-dark, hundreds of cows stand jammed rail to rail in their own filth, some sage in canvas slings. The artist starts to draw, fast, before anyone throws them out. This is a magazine called Frank Leslie's Illustrated Newspaper, and it is about to do something almost no one has done before. It is going to show the city where its milk really comes from. This was a world before photographs in newspapers, so the engraving was the weapon, and Leslie aimed it like one. Week after week, the illustrations spread across the page. The filthy sheds, the rows of cramped stalls, the dying cows hoisted in their slings. For the first time, a mother in a Manhattan tenement could look down at the picture of green pastures on her milk can, then look at the drawing of the shed it truly came from, and understand that she had been lied to. The public fury was enormous, and it did not cool. You would think that settled it. It did not. When the city convened an official investigation to respond to the outrage, the inquiry was compromised from the start. Officials with their own ties to the trade steered it, and when the verdict came down, it largely cleared the distillers. The men who ran the sheds walked away. The whitewash was almost as brazen as the fraud. But the images could not be unseen. The pressure built for 4 more years, until it finally forced something new into existence. In 1862, New York passed a law banning the sale of swill-fed milk and requiring that dairies be inspected. Read that again. It was one of the first targeted food safety laws in the entire United States. Before this, the notion that a government should walk into a business and check whether the food it sold was safe to eat barely existed. Buyer beware was the whole system. Milk did not just get regulated. Milk helped invent the very concept of regulating food. One dead child and one printed engraving at a time. The carton in your refrigerator, with its grade and its date and its inspection stamp, traces its family tree straight back to those sheds. That should have been the end of the danger. It was only the beginning of a fight that is still going on today. Killing the swill trade did not make milk safe. Even clean-looking milk from a healthy country cow could carry tuberculosis, typhoid, scarlet fever, and diphtheria straight into a child. The real fix came from science, and this is the part that should make you angry, because science had the answer and people fought it for decades. First came the workarounds. Gail Borden had patented condensed milk in the 1850s, sealing milk in cans with sugar and heat so it would keep, and the Union Army rationed it through the Civil War, some historians arguing it helped feed the North to victory. Then came the real breakthrough. Louis Pasteur had shown in 1864 that gentle heating killed the microbes that spoiled liquids, though here is a fact almost no one gets right. Pasteur himself never pasteurized milk. He was working on wine and beer. Applying his method to milk came later from other scientists, and when it did, the results were staggering. A New York businessman named Nathan Straus, a co-owner of Macy's who had lost his own children to milk-borne disease, decided no other parent should bury a child over a glass of milk. Starting in 1892, he spent his own fortune building pasteurized milk depots across the city, handing clean milk to the poor for pennies or for nothing. The proof was almost unbelievable. Of more than 20,000 children fed on his pasteurized milk over 4 years, only 6 died. 6, in the same city where the swill trade had once counted its dead babies by the thousand. That same year, a New Jersey doctor named Henry Coit launched the certified milk movement, a system of medically supervised clean dairies, because he had watched infants die of dirty milk and could not accept that it was normal. Between the depots, the doctors, and the slow spread of pasteurization, the numbers moved in a way that is hard to fathom. The American infant death rate fell from around 125 deaths for every 1,000 births in 1891 to under 16 by 1925. Clean milk did not just save a few children. It helped save a generation of them, and it ranks among the greatest life-saving victories in the entire history of public health. And people fought it. Dairy interests and purity crusaders attacked pasteurization for decades as unnatural, as tampering, as ruining a wholesome food. The exact same argument, natural purity against regulated safety, that ran through the swill scandal, ran straight through the fight over the cure. And it never ended. Right now, in this decade, that same battle is being fought again over the same glass. Lawmakers are moving to widen access to raw, unpasteurized milk. Delaware legalized permitted raw milk sales in 2025. North Carolina fought over a raw milk ban into 2026. And in late 2024, the H5N1 bird flu virus was detected in commercial raw milk, where researchers found it could survive in the refrigerator for over a month. The oldest argument in the history of milk is back on the table, and most people arguing it have never heard of the swill sheds. So look again at the carton in your refrigerator. That plain word on the side, pasteurized, is not marketing. It is a scar. Every dairy inspection, every sell-by date, every grade stamped on a bottle of milk exists because a magazine sent an artist into a shed, because a Macy's owner buried his children and refused to let other families do the same. Because a contemporary estimate once counted 8,000 small graves in a single year, and a city finally could not look away. Milk was there at the dawn of farming, when a mutation rewrote our own bodies to drink it. It was there in the sheds beside the distilleries, sold to the poorest mothers with a lie printed on the label. It was there when a nation invented the very idea of food safety, one law at a time, over the bodies of children. And it is sitting in your kitchen right now, plain and white and cold, carrying all of that history in a glass you will drink without a second thought. The next time someone tells you a food is safe, because it is natural, because it is pure, because it is the way things used to be, remember what the way things used to be actually looked like. Remember the green pasture printed on the can and the dying cow in the sling behind it. Milk was never just a drink. It never was. If this changed how you see the glass in your fridge, tell me in the comments which everyday food you think has the darkest history hiding behind it. And subscribe, because next week we are pulling the label off another one.